Hello, I'm Brenton Simons, President and CEO of American Ancestors and New England Historic Genealogical Society, and I'm assisted here today by Sedgwick, who will be staying with me for a few minutes. And my special guest today is Curt DiCamillo, who has someone he wants to introduce us to as well.
Well, this is Miles Andre DiCamillo, not that we're being pretentious or anything, who does not like to be held for very long, but who is sort of like the only thing that's kept me sane during COVID. So say hello, Miles. We're going to put you down. I know you want to get down.
He's a beauty. And Sedgwick's going to get the treat he's been longing for. And Daddy's going to go to work now. Well, welcome to the Antiquarto. I'm delighted to have Curt as my special guest today. And we're going to cover a range of topics. And I guess I wanted to start with, Curt, your work as curator of the New England Historic Genealogical Society's collections. And as I think back on our history, in 1845, when we were founded, the first members established that we would collect books and we would publish genealogical and historical research, but they also stated that we would collect paintings and have a cabinet of curiosities. And I think of you as the master of our cabinet of curiosities, but tell our viewers a little bit about what you do as our curator.
Well, I am very lucky because the description of cabinet of curiosities is something that appeals to me greatly. And that goes back, of course, to Renaissance Europe, when princes had these secret rooms filled with all kinds of amazing things. And they weren't always fine art. They were sometimes things like big shells or unusually large tree stumps. And I think what we have at the Society is just that. We have important art, but we also have art that doesn't have intrinsic value, but has a lot of historical value, sometimes just historical oddities. And I feel that my great pleasure has been the opportunity to take all of this and try to make sense of it. 175 years of art that had never been cataloged before and was just dispersed here and there, and to put it together to get a sense of who we are and to interpret the American experience through genealogy as seen in art.
Well, I can say that our guests and our members love having tours with you, both in person when that's available and virtually, and you have turned up some amazing things in our collections. One of the things you've worked on in the last couple of years has reached fruition in this 175th anniversary year for us, and it's this very special book. If you haven't seen it, it's called Family Treasures, 175 Years of Collecting Art and Furniture at the New England Historic Genealogical Society. And it was written by the noted curator Gerald Ward, who is a curator emeritus at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and a great scholar in American decorative arts. And you had a big hand in this book. Do you want to tell our viewers a little bit about it? And then after that, we're going to show everyone a few things that are special to both you and me in the book.
Great. Well, as you know, because you started this process, this has been going on, the genesis of this book, at least 5 or 6 years. And the problem, and this is the problem I think anywhere in life, is that you can have great ideas, but unless you have the person to carry them out, they just don't go very far. So when I started 4.5 years ago at the Society, this was a project that you had already started. Jerry had been engaged to write the book, but there wasn't any time of anybody on staff to give it the proper direction. So this is one of the first things that I was able to do, was to take this sort of in my hand, but it went hand in hand with documenting the collection, because as I said before, we've never actually had a comprehensive listing of all the art that we had. So we had to do an inventory first, and then from that, pick what we consider to be some of the most important pieces we had. And I think we have 78 pieces in this book. And Jerry and I worked together for the last 4 years in putting this together. And it's been the culmination of my entire time at the Society. And I think it's for the very first time physical evidence of how important the art that we hold is, because we are oftentimes overlooked. I know curators who've been here their entire lives in Boston have no idea that we have an art collection. So this book, which I also happen to have a copy of right here, is, I think, hugely important in getting the word out there that we're not just a society of genealogy, we're a society that is artistically focused and focused on important scholarly research.
Well, you know, what I like to tell people is that genealogy seeps across many different disciplines. And that's the way we should look at it. We should look at family history as it relates to other disciplines and incorporate them. Because, you know, when we publish a family history, it has to be more than a phone book. It has to be more than just names and dates.
Absolutely.
It has to tell stories of their lives and their communities and their strengths and their weaknesses. And that's one of the things that comes out so well in our collections. And you're right about curators not knowing it and then being absolutely astounded when they see what we have, and that, or pieces that they haven't known where they are for decades. I think you're going to show one of those, the Lemon-Phillips filigree, that we are able to surface and put out there to scholars. But we've both selected a few things in the book that that we especially like. And why don't I start with one? We can take turns here.
Sure.
And the object that I wanted to start with, which is one I've written about, is the portrait of Rebecca Rawson. And this, I hope you can see that. And if you can't, this is another reason to buy the book at AmericanAncestors.org. But this is one of two portraits we own of father and daughter. And the father, Rebecca's father, was Edward Rawson, who was the secretary of the Massachusetts Bay Colony in the late 17th century. And Rebecca, his daughter, this portrait was done of her when she was a teenager. And it was an early object that came to us. It came to us in the mid-19th century, not long after our founding. And the portrait of her, both portraits had suffered. Edward Rawson's, as you know, Edward Rawson's portraits had its eyes cut out. So maybe kids used it to hide behind the way they do in things like Scooby-Doo. And poor Rebecca's portrait had been folded up, and I think may have even come to us in a large envelope, but it had been folded up into squares. And I think it's because she was something of a scarlet woman, through no fault of her own, I hasten to say, but because one of the great tragedies of 17th century Boston, one of the great scandals of 17th century Boston befell her. And in a nutshell, she married a man who was quite a rogue, an imposter, someone who pretended he came from great wealth, and they were married and went back to England. And this fellow ran off with the Rawson dowry. Turns out he already had a wife. Rebecca was stuck in England. And then the story goes into a little bit of legend that she came back in 1692, or was on her way back to Boston via Port Royal, Jamaica, just in time for the great earthquake, which resulted in a tsunami and swept, many New Englanders were swept away in that tsunami. And what was interesting to me about this portrait is it had blended into fiction. John Greenleaf Whittier had in the 19th century written a book, and he told the story, as you know, of Rebecca as part of the background in a book that is presented as a travel log, Leaves from Margaret Smith's Journal. And I wanted to know what parts of the story were fact and which were fiction. And so it resulted in a lot of work for me to sift between what was fact and fiction. It turns out it really did happen, which astounds people that this unlikely tale is true. And so I presented it in a book I wrote several years ago called Witches, Rakes, and Rogues. And that's just scratching the surface of the story. And by the way, don't believe the Wikipedia entry for this story. As you know, I can sniff out when people have read the Wikipedia entry, which is full of erroneous information. This book and my book presents the real story. But show us one of the objects that appeals to you from the book.
Well, it's funny because I can't say this man appeals to me, but his story does. And I'm going to see how, whoops, if you guys can see. So that's the Reverend Tyler there. And actually right beneath him is his wife, who we'll talk about just briefly. But Andrew Tyler was a very popular, at least initially, minister at a congregational church in Dedham. And he had a very wealthy wife, and you saw her portrait just beneath there. She's the only Copley we have, a very rare Copley pastel. We don't know who painted the portrait of him, but it turns out that he was a loyalist. So as revolutionary fervor got started in Massachusetts, he was on the wrong side of things. And by 1770, his parish considered him to be a liability because of his strong, strident views. And even though he had graduated from Harvard and was considered a great scholar, he was they tried everything they could to smear his reputation. And when that didn't work, they cut his salary in half, hoping he would get the hint and leave. And when that didn't work, they cut his salary out altogether, and he still wouldn't leave. And they finally had to negotiate a substantial settlement for him to leave, which happened in 1772 as the revolution was really getting some fervor beneath it. And he died in 1775, just before the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord. And it's interesting because you read about him, he comes across as sharp-tongued, as somebody who insisted he was right in every situation. And those criticisms go on, but what's clear is that this is something that his parishioners wrote after they had turned against him. So as we can see so often today in politics, the question is, what's really true in this? Were these criticisms about him something that they would have said before 1770 when it became clear that he was a loyalist, or were these things that were said because he became a political liability? And it's a great story. His wife, her family ended up owning an enormous part of what is today Maine. And it's a wonderful snapshot of Massachusetts history, and I love the story behind it.
Well, and it just shows how much there is behind a portrait. People walk past these portraits not knowing that there are, really with all our objects, the society, amazing things that you can learn from them. One of the other objects I thought I would just show you that is in the book, and I had a hand in collecting it, is this wooden fragment. And this is a fragment from the Tuckerman mansion, which stood in Boston in the 18th century. The Tuckermans were a wealthy family in Boston. And the piece that I showed you came to us in an unusual way. And that was, I was visiting my cousin Hugh in Amherst, and talking about the society and what I do. And he said, well, I've got something that might really interest you in the basement, and I'm going to go get it. And so Hugh went down into the basement, and he came up holding this item that was certainly not in no way prepossessing. I mean, it looks like a piece of firewood. And then but on closer inspection, you see it's clapboarding, and there's a round patch, and there's a wonderful old label on it. And what this was a piece of clapboarding from the Tuckerman mansion in Boston. It was on Washington Street. And this piece of clapboarding survived the siege of Boston. The house survived the siege of Boston, but a cannonball went through this part of the house, and the family patched it, so there's a round patch on it. And then when the house was torn down in the late 19th century, the family treasured this memento of the siege of Boston from the late 18th century and cut out this piece of the exterior of the house. And it had passed down in the family to nearly the present day, when my cousin inherited it and gave it to me, and I gave it to the society, because I thought, there are so few relics like this of this period in Boston. Here was a house which actually took damage during a revolutionary action. And for young people, especially for children visiting the society, to be able to look at or hold or examine a relic from that period, I thought would be very exciting. And so that's why I donated it to the society, because I thought, here again is a piece of wood which at first glance is not significant, but then when you look at it more closely, it starts to tell really quite an interesting story.
That's actually a perfect example of what I said earlier, something that would not fetch millions at an auction, but something that tells a story, something that's a part of American history. And to me, as you know so well, the thing that I like the most about anything, whether it's an object like that or a painting or even a little corner in downtown Boston, a story that's attached to it, because I find that's what people engage with the most, is something, because otherwise it's just like, this is important, and you hear this recitation and you forget about it. But if you have something to hang your hat on, because like, oh my God, that was in this and that happened then, and that's where that came from, I think people really respond to that.
Yeah, it's true. So what's your next object?
Well, my next object, I think, is one of the most important things we own, which is the Lemon-Phillips filigree. Let's see, get a better picture of it there. First of all, I have to say this object, no photograph does justice to it. And this photograph we have in the book is the best we've ever had done of it. But it's exceptionally rare, and it's important for all kinds of reasons. But let's start as to why it's rare. We only know of 24 of these that were made in America in the 18th century. And of those 24, only maybe 4 or 5 are actually in a lozenge style, or in this case, like a hatchment. And the story of why it's here, why we call it filigree, another word for that would be quilling, is this was something that young ladies of an aristocratic disposition, besides sewing, were taught to do. And quilling was actually taking a quill, so that would be a goose feather with the hard end, and you would use that and you would twirl little pieces of paper around to create a design. So this is actually hundreds, in some cases thousands of pieces of little coiled paper that this 18-year-old girl created in 1735 of the 2 arms of her father and mother's family. And she sprinkled around the sides of it wonderful little bits of mica, so it has a little glitter to it. It was meant to be seen in candlelight, so you would get this wonderful sense of glitter. And the important thing is that she also is somebody who could actually claim a genuine claim to these arms, as opposed to somebody today who, from the back of a magazine, sends in $25 to get a coat of arms, a genuine British subject. My favorite part about her is that she ended up having 18 children, and she lived. And where her house was, her family house, was the center of the Battle of Bunker Hill. They had to flee during the battle, and they ended up moving to Worcester, and they stayed there pretty much for the rest of their lives, she and her family. But it's an amazing snapshot. Even more amazing is its salvation, because when I first came to the society, I think on my first day, in fact, you told me that you discovered this in a back stairwell in pieces. And you got a very important woman who sadly is no longer with us, called Betty Ring, who was an expert in this kind of art, to give us the money to have it properly restored. And my favorite thing, possibly the only thing we can say that we have that is better than something the Museum of Fine Arts has, is this. Because when Malcolm Rogers, the recently retired director, came through a couple of years ago, he said, I want that for the MFA. We don't have anything that nice. So it rings all kinds of bells. I think it has such a wonderful resonance with American history and just fortitude. I mean, think about this. She made this when she's 18 years old. Her house is destroyed during the American Revolution. She has 18 kids and she lives into her 80s. That's an amazing story.
Well, it is truly a treasure of pre-federal Boston. And I remember you mentioned the story of my discovering it in a trunk on the back staircase at the society. And I knew Betty Ring had a real interest in armorial works, needleworks, and paperworks like this one. And when I called her, she said, I'm booking a flight to Boston right now. And she told me that this had been, essentially, scholars had not known where the Lemon-Phillips filigree was for a century. It was just off the radar. No one knew where it was. And that's why it was so important that she just flew right up to Boston to take a look at it, and then generously paid, as you say, to have it restored. And the restoration work was amazing, because it had gathered a lot of dust in 100 years of sitting around. And the curator, the restorer who did that work, did incredible work bringing out all the shimmering aspects of it. The third and final object I'll show our viewers that I love is another one which I hope to get into the collection, and it is this family tree. It's the Folger family tree, which again, you'll have to buy the book to get a good view of it, but it is a pen and ink family tree. And this was, I ran into it, Curt, at the Boston Antiquarian Book Fair, what year was that? It was purchased in 2009, so 11 years ago. And I it was with a dealer who deals in maps principally. And I thought, wow, there is an object of American family history. This is a family for which we have quite a lot of information. As it turned out, we had all the papers by the man who illustrated this family tree, everything save the family tree. And the other thing that I knew right away was that Benjamin Franklin was on his maternal side a Folger, and there is his mother right on the family tree. And it's noted that Dr. Franklin's mother is pictured or enumerated here on the tree. And so I called one of our very generous members and said, I think this is something we should have. And that gentleman agreed and said, we need it. He didn't even ask how much it cost. And it wasn't frightfully expensive, but it was expensive enough. We needed a donor to help us acquire it. And what's great is it fills a little gap in that collection, that we had all the other papers for that family, and now we've got the family tree. And I love how the whole iconography of family trees is something that is very interesting to me. And I love this one is a sort of an odd shaped tree. It's almost like a cypress or something. Usually they look like they are an oak tree, and you'll see the very distinctive oak leaves. And but this one is an unusual tree. And the artist notes that he drew it at the age of 60 with his left hand. And we've never quite known why the left hand note was significant, but maybe he was right-handed, who knows? But that to me is a treasure that again speaks to the iconography of family history. How did people in the 19th century or earlier record their family history? And we often see this, of course, in the form of Bible records, but there are these wonderful pen and ink family records, of which we have a large collection, and a number of them are pictured in the book. And then special trees like this, which were often hand-drawn, and also in the 19th century, they were often printed in the form of lithographs. And so I consider that one a real treasure of our society. And I'm glad that since 2009, it has been on Newbury Street.
Well, I think that saying that it's filled a small hole is a bit of an understatement. It actually it was a big hole that was missing, and this brought all the pieces together of the Folger family. And I think it's also important to mention that branches of that family founded, of course, the Folger Coffee Company and the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington. The other thing, and I think I mentioned this to you not that long ago, is that the dealer that you bought it from has twice contacted me in the last 2 years and asked to buy it back.
Oh yeah, he's asked me too.
Which shows
not
you
getting it. It's not going
absolutely anymore. Not, but it shows you what a good purchase it was when the dealer really wants it back.
Yes, but it's in the. I think even he would acknowledge it's in the right place.
Absolutely,
but it is obviously something that would be very saleable. So, what's your last object?
Well, I obviously seem to have a theme here because this is another lozenge-shaped armorial. Let's see here. This is, let me get a better view. This is one of the coolest things we have, and possibly the most unique thing. It's called the Welch armorial, and it has a lot of different strands of Boston history in it. Pretty sure that it was carved in the 18th century by John Welch, who was a carver, a furniture maker, a painter, and most importantly for us, John Singleton Copley's favorite frame maker. And we think he made the frame, and then it passed down to various generations of the Welch family until it came in the 19th century into the ownership of Charles Welch, who we're pretty sure took out what was initially in the frame, and we have no idea what that was. And he commissioned a wooden, almost 3D sculpture of the family arms, which was set into there. And this man is important, not just because he was a Harvard graduate and a leader in Boston society and a member, of course, of the society, but also he was the founder of Welch and Forbes, a money management firm which still exists today in Boston. And he was very clearly—
They're good friends of ours.
They are very good friends of ours, very good supporters. He was clearly proud of his ancestry, and much like with the Lemon-Phillips filigree, these are arms that descended from a family who had the right to carry them before the Revolution. And what I think is so cool about them, the colors are brilliant, but it's a three-dimensionality of it, and particularly the bicorn, something I'd never heard of, and so I started researching this, which is a unicorn with two horns. I don't know of anything else like this that exists in American iconography. It's such an interesting combination of carved wood. The frame itself, which is in a Rococo style, is mainly gesso, which is like a heavy duty plaster. And we had it restored probably 3 years ago now. A generous donor who came in once a year and asked if there was anything we needed restored in a framing way. And they did an amazing job of restoration. And I think its importance is clearly indicated by the fact that it appears in the cover of the book.
It's a beautiful cover item. And, you know, that's another one that one of our archivists a number of years ago called me up and said, Brenton, we've got a coat of arms here. And I said, oh, and pray tell, what do you mean? And he said, no, you've got to come see this one. And it had been somewhere stashed away in the collections. And I remember when I first saw it, I thought, wow, look at that. It really is a treasure.
And that's important to point out. We don't know how it came to us. We don't know who gave it to us and when it came to us. So it's fortunate that we have these discoveries and you recognizing how important it was when you saw it. But because art was not the foremost thing in the past 175 years, the art was not recorded in the same way that manuscripts were. So we can only guess, and I think it's a pretty good guess, that a member of the Welch family gave it to us for safekeeping. And it may have actually been Charles Welch himself, who lived into the 20th century, who could very easily decided as a member, I think he was a life member of the society, that this would be a good home for something like this.
And while you're on that subject, a lot of our collections do have, we have those wonderful logbooks of donations that are made. So most things are covered in that, but obviously the odd thing slips through that we don't have a record for exactly when in the 19th century it came to us. But I want to turn the subject a little bit to some of the work you've done in exhibits, and we'll just cover this for a second. One of the things you do in addition to curating and logging and writing descriptions of our collections is occasionally you curate an exhibit, and we have one now on the Mayflower. Would you just say a few words about this? Because this is obviously the quadricentennial year, and you did something special on the first floor of the Society.
Yes, we took actually the International Reading Room, which is actually one of our largest rooms, and took everything out art-wise and reinstalled it just with pieces that are associated with Mayflower. We have 3 display cases, we have wall pieces, we have wonderful interpretive panels, something we've never done before, that cover the entire wall. And this opened in January of 2020. Turns out to be an interesting year. And so we didn't get a whole lot of visitors to see it before we shut down for COVID. But I'm particularly proud of it because it's the first large scale exhibition that we've put on in a professional way at the Society. Our exhibitions tend to be small little groupings of objects with a little sign here or there. This is really like what you would see in a proper museum. And of course, we are a proper museum.
And I think that one of the really admirable parts of this too is that we strive to tell or allow the tribe to tell the Wampanoag history story. And by turning to members of the tribe, so that the Aquinnah and Mashpee people and their history and their traditions are represented in their own ways and in their own voice. And I think you did a nice job on that. And the other thing is, while there weren't a lot of visitors, obviously in the short time it was open before COVID, the good news is it has been filmed a lot. So it has been online. And whenever we've done an interview at the Society, and there've been a lot of them this year on the Mayflower story. Fortunately, it's been seen by a lot of, and
it's not just that. We also have that incredible model, as you know, of the Mayflower that in other days we had out front in front of the Society every day, but inside it formed a lovely backdrop. And we also have a member of the tribe, a figure holding her baby that also went outside to show the 2 main focuses. And speaking of the text panel that talks about the Wampanoag tribe, I think it's important to say that this was a collaborative effort, and that particular text was written by Ginevra Morse. And we had all around the Society, we had a committee that did research that we tried to represent the Mayflower in every possible context with fairness and respect to everybody.
Well, let's change topics. We haven't even gotten to what you're famous for. And
what's that?
You're famous. So Curt, our viewers will know, and if they don't know, Curt is one of the foremost experts on the English country house. and he leads a series of heritage tours principally to the UK, but up to other countries as well for us. And would you say just a little bit about what we do in the heritage tour area and what people might look forward to after the COVID travel restrictions lift?
Well, we have two basic kinds of tours. We have study tours that are focused on genealogy, and then we have heritage tours, which is what I oftentimes lead, which focuses a little bit on genealogy, but mainly on art and architecture, and sometimes even gardens. And you're right, most of them tend to be to England, although we have gone to Germany and to France and to Italy as well. But coming up for this year, we have a trip currently scheduled for April to Philadelphia that we're probably going to have to move until the fall. And I think we can safely say we'll be doing a trip in October of next year to Gardens and Villas of Rome. And I have to say, as an aside, people oftentimes say to me, why is Rome so important, or Italy in general? If you study the English country house, so much of what that is starts in Italy, because the Brits have always been obsessed with the Italians. And then in the fall, well, I think that'll be two in the fall. We'll probably do we'll probably do Rome and Philadelphia in the fall. And then in December, we'll be doing our first country house Christmas in England, where we actually will have a week at Weston Park and actually enjoying a country Christmas. There will be less visiting of houses and more focusing on Christmas fairs and caroling and lots of good alcohol and food.
Say something about Weston Park for those who've never been there. And it is magical. I've been a couple of times. It is simply divine.
Weston Park is my favorite place to take a group. And I should say, in general, because my focus is the British country house, I always try to stay in a country house. And that's not that difficult because a lot of these houses have been converted into hotels. Weston Park is not that. It is still a house. It's owned by a nonprofit foundation. And in order to get it, you have to book the entire house. So there's no one else there but you. You have 2 butlers and a French chef and 1,000 acres of Cape Billy Brown designed parkland. And it's like being in paradise. And it's what you would do if you
say where it is.
It's in Shropshire. My favorite county because it's overlooked by Americans so often. It's the largest inland county in England, borders on Wales. And the most important thing that makes all this come together is Gareth Williams, who is the curator there and who accompanies us every day. It's the only place that I have taken tours back over and over and over again. It's like living in a home, not a hotel.
And one of the great things about this tour you've planned is, as you were saying, it's really a preview of Christmas because it's in early December, so that you can come back and have your own Christmas. You're not actually there over Christmas. So
it starts the last week of November, the last day of November actually, and goes into the first week of December. And one of the things we'll be doing, speaking of Mayflower, is going to a little church on a private estate called Shipton Hall, where a number of Mayflower passengers actually worshiped before they got onto the boat.
The Moore children were from
yes
that location, which is a saga
all unto itself, an unpleasant saga. Yes.
Tell us what is your favorite country house, or what is your most favorite place you've taken one of our groups to, and why?
Well, my favorite place, any tour anywhere in the world, is to Weston Park because it's so complete. Because you feel like, when I tell that to people when we get on the bus, when we leave London, we always meet in London, and I say, I want you to stop thinking about the rest of the world. Don't think about the news, don't think about politics. We're going to be immersed in a different land. And you don't have to think about it. Everything is taken care of for you. You're filled. I mean, the dining room at Weston Park has 6 Van Dykes in it. So every room is like that. And it's hard to imagine walking around and feeling that all this is yours. There aren't even locks on the bedroom doors because it's just you and your group that are there. For houses, my favorite style, as I think you know, is neoclassicism. And for neoclassical design, I can't think of any place that's more spectacular than a house in Yorkshire called Harwood House. It is still owned by the Harwood family today, the Lassells. And it's just spectacular. Robert Adam did his most amazing interiors here, and it's a house I could never, ever get tired of.
I think one of the things that's special about the DiCamillo travel tours, first of all, we keep the group small. So we're, say, 20 or under. And it is what I call genealogy adjacent. This is, we're not there looking on microfilm or going into archives, but we're learning about the history of the day, the context of the way people lived. We're visiting localities. It's an immersion into a world some of our ancestors might have known or viewed from afar if they weren't a part of it. And it really is it feels like almost like a master's program, but without all the homework. In history and the decorative arts and music, culture, all of the things that are so compelling about history. And I think one of the things you do really well and why you have such a following is you put together just a masterful grouping of activities. And one of the things, Curt and I have been working together for a number of years, and one of the things that I said when we started working together, and you've done such a great job on, is let's make these visits to private houses in the main, so that there are places where people would not have access to them. But if we do go to a National Trust house, have something very special about it. Are the former owners there?
We go before it opens to the public. That's or after it closes.
And we see something that normally people don't get to see, and we get to do something that is special and unique that you wouldn't see if you were just on your own self-guided tour, like have lunch or dinner in some of these amazing settings. So I hope that everyone watching this will consider when COVID travel restrictions lift, just think how much everybody is going to want to go somewhere and somewhere beautiful. And as you say, not have to arrange a thing, just be taken care of and listen and learn and enjoy convivial company. And so the DiCamillo travel program, the Heritage program, really epitomizes that.
Well, I think what you just said is key, and I'm glad you said it, which is all you have to do is show up. And then once you get on the bus to wherever we're going in England, you don't think about anything else. Everything is done for you. You don't have to give it a thought to anything. And I also want to mention something that I think is particularly exciting that we're going to do in 2022, which is the Austro-Hungarian capitals. We're going to take the Orient Express from Prague to Vienna. And there's so much in between there. We'll be spending 3 days in each city. And the Orient Express, they only do this particular journey twice a year. And we had to book this way in advance. So I also want people to think beyond England. I mean, England is the beat of my heart, but so much else is related. Even though the English may not think so, they are European. And there's an awful lot of strands and threads we can bring together. And speaking actually of immersion, I was thinking we were talking about that, of the Moore children again. We go to this chapel next year for Christmas at Shipton Hall. It's going to be for a service. It's not going to just be in the church where the children were, and it's going to be recreation. We're going to have the High Sheriff of Shropshire there with us, and we're going to have all the local bigwigs coming in to share this service, which is a recreation of what we think the service that more children would have been experiencing before they got on the Mayflower.
Oh, that's fabulous. Well, I think you said it well, and we look forward to traveling again. And I want to thank my colleague and friend, Curt DiCamillo, for joining us here for this edition of the Antiquarto. Before we go, Curt, where would viewers look? We'll have ordering information for this book if you're interested, and we hope you are. At the end, we'll provide a toll-free number and internet address. But for tours, do you want to just explain where viewers will go to look at upcoming tours?
Absolutely. We can also provide a link for that as well. But the easy thing is to go to our website, americanancestors.org/heritage-tours, and you'll be seeing all the upcoming tours that we have planned with me, and we also have other leaders as well. We have a whole program of wonderful tours that I think share cultures from all around the world.
Well, again, thank you so much on behalf of Sedgwick. Curt,
I've seen him walking back and forth.
Oh, yeah, Sedgwick, if you wondered what that squeaking was earlier, Sedgwick was trying to get back in the office. He did a squeaky toy. He's looking for another treat. So, and so I better sign off and give him that treat. But thank you so much for watching today, and we look forward to seeing you again. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.